So as many of you will know, the Resident Evil series turned 25 this year. Back in 1996, the original game introduced me to what would soon become my favourite genre of video game, survival horror. In the years since the original Resident Evil's release, I have played dozens of survival horror games, with many of them going on to become some of my favourite games of all time. So to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the original Resident Evil and the birth of the survival horror genre, I thought I'd make a countdown of the top 30 survival horror games ever made. Before I begin though, I need to quickly define what I consider to be a survival horror game. A survival horror game must have, in my opinion, a strong emphasis on resource management, puzzle solving, and exploration. If you are able to blast away at everything that moves with an almost limitless amount of ammunition, you are not really playing a survival horror game. For this reason, I won't be including games like Resident Evil 4 or Bloodborne on this list. As incredible as those games are, they are first and foremost action games, and therefore aren't eligible for this list. So with all that preamble out of the way, let's get to the list itself. Detention is a 2D survival horror game with a striking art style and very creepy atmosphere. I found its story to be fascinating and yet deeply upsetting, since most of it is based on actual real world events. Detention is in no way the scariest game on this list, but the clever puzzles and disturbing storyline kept me hooked until the very end. Clocktower 3 is a great survival horror game, and the scariest entry in the series by far. Some of the puzzles can be a little frustrating, and constantly getting chased by your pursuers can get repetitive after a while, but when everything clicks in Clocktower 3, there are very few games as terrifying as this one. The game that started it all. The original Resident Evil has aged quite a bit since its release over 25 years ago, but it's still a surprisingly enjoyable game to play. It's still probably the most challenging game in the series, and some may be put off by its brutal difficulty, but those who persevere will find a rewarding experience waiting for them. Resident Evil also introduced us all to whatever the fuck this voice acting is.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
What is it? What? What is this? What is it?
Outstanding level design and some brilliant puzzles still make this game worth a playthrough today, even if it isn't remotely scary anymore. Critics destroyed this game when it first released, but Daymare 1998 is an excellent survival horror game that not enough people know about. It's a very janky game in nearly every aspect, from its animation to its questionable voice acting, but its story is very interesting, its action is fun, and it has some really clever puzzles. Except this one. This one can go fuck itself. There are moments when Resident Evil 0 comes close to greatness. Its visuals are incredibly detailed, and its level design is amongst the best in the series. But all that is undermined by the game having the worst inventory system in the series, hilariously bad enemy designs, and an absolutely ludicrous amount of backtracking. Resident Evil 0 isn't a bad game, it's just a shame that it could have easily been so much better. It's debatable whether you can even call PT a game, but it's hard to deny how big its impact was. PT was absolutely terrifying and really demonstrated the power of the PS4. For what was essentially a demo, PT looked absolutely incredible and might actually still be the best looking game on the system. Visuals aside, however, PT was still a unique little puzzle game that was incredibly good at getting under your skin. It really is a shame that Kojima will probably never get to bring Silent Hills to life, because if PT is anything to go by, it would have been something really special. A lot of people love to trash on FNAF for its simplistic gameplay and cheap jump scares, but regardless of what you think of the game itself, you can't deny that it's fucking good at making you jump out of your seat. Five Nights at Freddy's proved to the world that you didn't need a big AAA budget to create a truly terrifying game, and even to this day it's one of the most enjoyable games to watch other people play. I have always had a complicated relationship with Dino Crisis. On one hand, I truly love the concept behind this game. A group of special forces trying to survive in a facility crawling with dinosaurs is just an inspired idea for a survival horror game. And when the game is firing on all cylinders, there truly is nothing else like it. But unfortunately, too much of the game is filled with boring puzzles and monotonous backtracking. Still, a fun game and well worth a playthrough. Lone Survivor is unlike any other survival horror game I've ever played. It's not exactly scary in the traditional sense, but its story and world are incredibly oppressive and will stay with you for a long time after you've completed the game. It also has one of the greatest soundtracks I've ever heard in a survival horror game. Shinji Mikami's return to survival horror after he redefined the genre with Resident Evil 4 was met with pretty polarizing reviews at launch, but in the years since it has gained a pretty large cult following. I personally fucking love this game. It has the over-the-top action of something like Resident Evil 4, but unlike that game, The Evil Within does not completely abandon horror in favour of being an all-out action movie. In fact, there are times when The Evil Within is legitimately terrifying, especially when you are forced to run away from a chainsaw-wielding maniac or an 8-legged spider lady. This game is absolutely fantastic. Resident Evil Code Veronica has been the punching bag of the RE series for a long time, and I don't think that's exactly fair. I mean, sure, the game has its fair share of issues, its absolutely crazy amount of backtracking being high among them, but the game also has fantastic level design, intense bosses, clever puzzles, and an emotional storyline.
Steve.
Father. Father. Father.
You are probably laughing right now, but this cutscene has always been difficult for me to watch, especially since this is almost exactly how I ended up killing my own father. Except, you know, he wasn't a zombie. Despite its numerous issues, Code Veronica is great, and it's about time that Capcom gave it the remake treatment. Manhunt is probably the most disturbing and fucked up game on this list. Its horror doesn't come from monsters or zombies, but from showing the fucked up shit that humanity is capable of. It's a dark, violent, disturbing game that you'll need a strong stomach to get through, but if you are up to it, Manhunt will give you one of the tensest survival horror experiences you are ever likely to have. I have a lot of problems with SOMA's gameplay, and I think as a pure survival horror game, it's a disappointment. However, SOMA's story is so fucking incredible that it makes up for any minor issues I may have with the game. SOMA's narrative is so terrifyingly bleak and depressing that I still find myself thinking about it on a nearly daily basis. It's probably the only game to ever give me an existential crisis after completing it. Zombie U, or Zombi as it is now known, is a criminally underrated survival horror game by Ubisoft. It's one of the purest survival horror games ever made, where death comes quickly, and where there is real tangible punishment for dying. Unlike in practically any other survival horror game I can think of, when your player character dies in Zombie, they are dead permanently, and you will instead spawn as a new survivor. You will also lose all your supplies when you die, but if you are able to find the zombified corpse of your previous player character, you can kill them and retrieve your resources. Basically, imagine if Resident Evil had a baby with Dark Souls, and Zombie would be the result. Alien Isolation is the best Alien game ever made. It effortlessly captures the same horrifying atmosphere of the 1979 film, and is one of the most relentlessly terrifying games ever made. The Xenomorph's AI is unlike anything ever seen in a game before. For the most part, the alien behaves in a completely unpredictable manner and will keep you on your toes at all times. The game is perhaps a little bit too long, clocking in at around 20 hours, but it's still an absolute classic that I find myself replaying every couple of years. Haunting Ground is one of Capcom's lesser known survival horror games, which is a shame because this is one of the purest examples of the genre. There is no combat in the traditional sense. When an enemy appears, all you can really do is run. Thankfully, you have a canine companion who can help you temporarily fend off any pursuers. And let me tell you, the relationship you'll develop with this dog by the end of the game is really something special. The game also has a fantastic setting and surprisingly beautiful visuals for a PS2 game. One of my personal favourite survival horror games. I only recently completed Dead Rising for the first time a few weeks ago. Before then, I just found the game way too challenging and would always give up after a short period of time. However, if you stick with it, you'll discover one of the most challenging and rewarding horror games out there. It might be one of the most difficult games on this list, but the sense of accomplishment you'll feel if you manage to beat it is immense. Silent Hill changed survival horror games forever. Before Silent Hill, horror games mostly revolved around spooky monsters and lots of gore, but Silent Hill took a more psychological approach to horror, where it was usually what you couldn't see that kept you on edge. An absolutely masterful soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka is what gave this game most of its oppressive atmosphere, and it's still effective today. I mean, just listen to this and tell me this guy isn't a genius. I've only been in this room for about 10 seconds and already I want to get the fuck out of here. To be fair, the game has aged quite a bit since its release. Its visuals are terrible and its animations are...
Make him stop! Make him stop!
But surprisingly, despite these issues, the game is still incredibly immersive and enjoyable to play. Silent Hill is a timeless classic. Also, fuck Konami. It's been quite a few years since I last played the remake of Fatal Frame 2, mainly because I don't really use my Wii anymore, but also because the game scared me so much the first time I played it, that I decided I never wanted to put myself through that again. Fatal Frame 2 might be the scariest game ever made, and many people will probably struggle to complete it, which is a shame because Fatal Frame 2 has one of the most emotional and heartbreaking stories of any game I've ever played, and is well worth experiencing. Fatal Frame 2 is beautiful, haunting, and stupidly fucking terrifying. Outlast is graphic, offensive, and about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face, but that's why I love it. The game is a non-stop roller coaster ride from beginning to end, where you are flung from one crazy set piece to the next at lightning speed. The game's antagonists are also the stuff of nightmares, like the penis cannibals. Why do I call them the penis cannibals? Well, don't worry, I won't subject you to the answer in this video. Besides, I don't want to get demonetized. Anyways, Outlast is still a fantastic and nerve-wracking game to this day, and it's now on pretty much every platform, so there's no excuse for not giving it a go. There was a period of time when Amnesia: The Dark Descent was widely considered to be the scariest game of all time, and while that might not be the case anymore, it is still an incredibly unsettling and effective horror game. Castle Brennenburg is one of the greatest settings of any horror game ever made, and simply getting to explore this place is one of the highlights of the game. Amnesia is not the most terrifying game ever made, but it's still an unforgettable experience that any fan of the genre needs to play. What can even be said about Silent Hill 2 that hasn't been said a million times already? The game is a masterpiece and the pinnacle of storytelling in the survival horror genre. Its enemy design is amongst the best in the entire genre, and the Pyramid Head is still the stuff of nightmares. Silent Hill 2 is also probably the scariest entry in the series, and has unquestionably one of the greatest soundtracks in video game history. Silent Hill 2 is simply essential for any fan of horror media. Also, fuck Konami. This is a game I intend to do a full review of down the road, because Condemned is a very special game to me. As a huge fan of crime documentaries and the movies of David Fincher, Condemned was always going to appeal to someone like me. It's a dark, disturbing crime thriller that has a perfect setting and atmosphere. Its combat is brutal and intense, and exploring this dark and dreary world is always unnerving. It also has some of the most fucked jump scares ever. Simply put, if you are a fan of crime thrillers like Seven or The Silence of the Lambs, Condemned might end up being your favourite video game ever. Although its story is fucking retarded. Dead Space is Resident Evil 4 if Resident Evil 4 was scary and had actual resource management. Simply put, it's a masterpiece. The game is still terrifying to this day, and the Ishimura might be my favourite setting in a survival horror game. The game's HUD was also revolutionary for the time, allowing you to see Isaac's health and remaining ammo without ever having to enter a menu. Its combat was also unlike anything else out there at the time, forcing the player to dismember their foes in order to kill them. This heightened the tension in combat significantly, because you couldn't just fire blindly and expect to kill anything. You had to place your shots carefully. I love Dead Space, and I'm very excited to play the remake next year. Bioshock is one of those games that only seems to come around once every decade or so. There was simply nothing else like this game when it first released. It was the first game my brother bought for his Xbox 360, and it really showed off what that console was capable of. The game has an absolutely stunning 1950s era Art Deco world that I just fell in love with from the first second I laid eyes on it. Bioshock also has an incredible story with one of the greatest twists in video game history, and on top of all that, it's also a pretty effective horror game with some outstanding combat. What else can I say? Bioshock is one of the greatest games ever made. Resident Evil Remake is so good it actually hurts. As far as classic survival horror goes, this is the pinnacle of the genre. It takes the incredible level design of the original game and somehow improves on it. There are now more areas to explore, more bosses to defeat, more puzzles to solve, and more Lisa Trevor to scream and run away from. Whole areas are completely redesigned to be far more tense and frightening in the remake. For example, in the original game, the shark tank consisted of a single room with a few sharks that barely posed any kind of threat. In the remake, however, it's been redesigned into this fucking nightmare fuel. As someone with a severe fear of sharks, I struggled to even complete this section the first time I played the game. That means they did a good job. In my opinion, you can't call yourself a fan of Resident Evil unless you have played this game. And it's currently on all systems, so my advice is to get it as soon as possible. You won't regret it. Metro 2033 is a first-person survival horror game based on the novel of the same name. It's probably the most immersive horror game on this list. The game takes place in a post-apocalyptic wasteland that has become home to all manner of terrifying creatures. The world of Metro 2033 is fascinating to explore, and its action is top class. It's difficult for me to explain why I love this game so much in such a short period of time, but trust me when I say it's a masterpiece I frequently return to every few years. It was a close call between this and the original Resident Evil remake for the title of my favourite RE game, but Resident Evil 2 Remake just won out in the end. I did a full review of this one if you want to hear my extended thoughts on the game, but simply put, Resident Evil 2 Remake is outstanding. It's probably the scariest game in the series, with Mr. X being a truly terrifying force of nature. The level design has also been improved massively over the original Resident Evil 2, and now the RPD station feels a lot more enjoyable to explore as a result. The zombies in this game are also the stuff of nightmares, which is funny because I don't usually find zombies scary, but this game somehow found a way to make them feel threatening again. Basically, I love everything about this game, and if Bloodborne did not exist, it would probably be my favourite game on the PS4. A lot of people might argue that The Last of Us isn't a true survival horror, but I'd argue it's one of the truest survival horror games out there. I mean, is there anything more horrific than having to spend 18 hours in the company of a 13-year-old girl? All kidding aside, I would consider The Last of Us a survival horror game. There is a strong emphasis on resource management and only using firearms when it's absolutely necessary. There are also plenty of opportunities to explore the game's gorgeous environments for resources and upgrades, as well as a few enjoyable, if slightly simplistic puzzles. But we all know that's not the reason I placed this game so high on this list. The Last of Us is simply video game storytelling at its very best. Joel and Ellie's tale of survival is an emotional roller coaster that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Silent Hill 3 is a game I will never make a full review for, because if I did, it would simply be me obnoxiously fawning over this frustratingly perfect game for over an hour. I adore everything about Silent Hill 3. It has my favourite video game soundtrack of all time. I mean seriously, it's so good I even listen to it in my car, when my friends are present. And yes, they give each other strange looks like I've lost my mind, but I don't care, because I'm listening to art. Heather is also my favourite protagonist of any survival horror game. She is just a complete badass, and I love her no bullshit attitude.
The only thing you'll get from me is a gruesome death.
Leonard, is that you?
Death to all who turn their backs on God!
Is every person here a mental case?
The world of Silent Hill 3 might look fucked up to a lot of people, but I just see pure beauty when I look at this shit. Its environments are dark and scary, but there is also a strange beauty to them that I can't exactly describe. Silent Hill 3's story also affected me on an emotional level, and if you have played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Oh, also, the haunted house section is fucking incredible, and if that was the whole game, it would still probably have topped my list.
Help! Do you hear those voices? A family of 4 was sliced into bloody pieces in this room. Ah, the cries of the children. The murderer was caught. Do you know why he said he killed his family? Because I felt I had to! Anyway, I'm lying. It's all just a joke. I wanted to scare you, that's all. The truth is, only one person died. By suicide.
Silent Hill 3 is the best survival horror game ever made. Oh, and if you want to watch me play the game, I actually did a walkthrough several years ago where I completed the game on Extreme X without using any of the unlockable weapons or assists. I'm quite proud of it. So that is my list. Did I miss any game that you felt should have been included? If so, comment down below. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could like this video, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more stuff like this. I love you guys, take care of each other, and I'll see you again.